how about stocks, bonds, and cash? Let's cover that piece. Most
Okay,
people have
great.
some of that. Yeah.
Great.
What
So this
goes on
goes
there?
back to what you said about offshore stuff, right? Because they were talking about cash. So one of the nice things about cash is that cash can be used for anything. There's nothing about cash that makes it difficult to take away from somebody. Say, Paul, if I came after you and I wanted to take away your house, well, what do I have to do? I have to, well, first of all, I got to get the right to do it. I have to have a judgment. I have to go hire a sheriff. I have to have a levy on your house. I have to go execute on that levy. I have to have a sheriff's sale. Oh, and then if you have a first on your home, well, we got to pay off the bank the first. You have a cost of sale associated with that under a fire sale arrangement. And then whatever's left over after all that's done, that's the amount that I get to keep as the creditor. Well, that's a lot of work. Well, what about cash? Paul, do I have any cost of sale there? No. Is there any pre-existing lien holder like a mortgage on cash? No. So cash is easiest, and there's no inherent state exemptions like homestead exemptions or exemptions for life insurance policies that is attached to cash. And if there is, they're typically very, very de minimis, $5,000, $10,000, kind of small. So it's the first thing and the most intimate thing that we want to protect. Now here it's different because now an LLC may not be the answer for you. Certainly your revocable trust isn't going to be the answer to you. So we look to other types of tools. Now you're looking to things that are more like wealth preservation trusts, and they fall into a couple different categories. You have domestic trusts, and you also have offshore trusts as well. And it all depends on dollar values, what we're doing, who the creditors are, because every one of these tools, Paul, has a cost associated with it. Besides the legal fee costs, there's also ongoing costs. So if you're talking about $100,000, you don't create this mammoth offshore asset protection trust plan because you're going to asset protect yourself into the poorhouse. Your ongoing recurring costs are going to far exceed whatever benefit. But that doesn't mean that we can't do something a little less drastic and still very appropriate on the domestic side of things, which is very, very powerful and also and not nearly as expensive. Okay, so cash is huge because we need it for everything from if you're in litigation, from paying your lawyers, paying kids tuition. You gotta eat that month, right? So the last thing you want to do is allow a creditor to grab your cash and squeeze it, because they squeeze that cash, they're squeezing you. So you want to make sure that you have a way to protect that cash, notwithstanding the storm that's happening in the background.
And that's an asset protection trust for the cash?
Yes.
Domestic asset protection trust.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
there's variations. As we talked about a rainbow of gray, right? And so it's same thing there. It's variations.
Yeah, and I've heard you say before with the cash, it's that outside creditor coming in. It's not an inside liability because cash doesn't sue you.
Are you gonna sue yourself? And is the
Yeah.
cash gonna sue you? No.
Right.
If you think about it think of the cash as gold bullion, right? Is that bullion gonna sue you? No, it's ridiculous.
Right.
So we're never focused about the internal liabilities like we are a tenant. We're only focused on the outside grab, right?
Right. And do you recommend that if somebody's got a business and they have a massive cash position in the business, do you ever recommend that they pull the cash out in some systematic way and put it into a protective vehicle?
Yeah, absolutely. And so first of all, you have to understand a very important baseline of what's called, at what point does a company become insolvent? So let's go back to forget corporation versus LLC, just the company. Company has what I call its O's and O's. It's ordinary obligations and operations. Whatever the expenses are to operate, whether it's payroll, insurance matters, there's a certain amount of O's and O's. You need to make sure that you retain at least enough, I would say, for a quarter. That's 3 months worth of O's and O's. Okay, let's say it's $200,000 operation. Now that's not cash reserves. I'm talking about your operating expenses. But let's just say it's 200,000. Okay, but you got $2 million in the bank account because again, you're using it for reserves. I'm just worried. I want to be able to have flexibility. Okay, well, remember, go back to our internal creditor, Paul. When you have that creditor on the inside, what did I say about gobbling up the assets? I said building, equipment, inventory, IP, and cash reserves.
Cash. Yeah.
If you don't need the cash to be there, again, not to cause insolvency, your O's and O's are very important. Pull that cash out, especially if you're a disregarded entity, a partnership, or an S corporation, because you've already are going to be taxed on it. Now, this is different if it's a C corporation, because pulling money out of C's is a little bit different with taxation. So you pull the money out. Now, let's say I put it into a Brad Holdings entity, right? Now, I'm the owner of Brad Capital Holdings, and I'm also the owner of Bradco up here. So rather than Bradco reaching out to the bank to get a line of credit, I can then turn to the bank of Bradco. And as the owner, I can always recapitalize the amount of money that it needs, either on a quarterly basis. Maybe I have my own built-in ongoing line of credit. So now that money, rather than it being in the reserves, it's now being held by my protective entity. And what's nice about this, Paul, is that when I'm lending money, not giving, but lending money back up to my own corporation or entity, I'm papering that deal just like the bank would. So that becomes now secured promissory notes, deeds of trusts, UCC financing statements, right? So now my interest is protected in priority over a future creditor. Very important, right? So keeping too much cash is not good, but you do have some thresholds you have to maintain. But then there are ways, creative and protective ways, where you can always inject money back in a protective format.